when you read a story, get in the mind of the people who are involved in the story. The people of the first century are no different than we are. They had to deal with same stuff we did and do. Same thing with Jesus. He was tempted in all points as we are, yet without sin. But that meant he had to struggle with the same ways we do. So the challenge for us is to get in the minds of the people, and that's what we're doing today and for the next several weeks, is looking into how Jesus reacted to people and what that says to us about how we can react to people and how we ought to react to people. So let's get going to, we looked at the sinners last week, the people who said they could see, and Jesus says, because you see, you can see, you're blind. I want to get down to the sayers, the triers, These are the folks. Peter was at the apostles are in the midst of the storm. Storm has come in through the Megiddo Pass. It's blasting the north end of the Sea of Galilee. The water is in a great turmoil and the waves are higher and higher because the Sea of Galilee is relatively shallow compared to other lakes. Jesus walks to them on the water. They're terrified. He doesn't say, you guys need to learn how to swim if you don't have better faith, right? No, Jesus was understanding that when a storm gets this big, it's terrifying even to skilled sailors. And the apostles were skilled sailors. We looked at when Peter walks on the water, he falls down in the water. Jesus didn't reach down and say, why don't you just stay there if you can't do any better than this? I told you you could walk on the water. But Peter got out on the water and he lost his faith. Jesus didn't blast him for losing his faith. He didn't blast him for making a mistake. Jesus is very patient with people like us. Now we're going to be today, beginning in Luke chapter 7. This is another one of those accounts. When you read the Gospel, you discover that Jesus has an amazing affinity for the hurting and an amazing affinity for people who are struggling. In this text, beginning in verse 36, now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, so he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now he's gone to the in crowd. He's having dinner with the in crowd, the Pharisees. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. In our culture, we may not get this, but that's an incredibly intimate act to wash somebody's feet and put perfume on it. So what she's doing here to a strange man is totally unusual. And that is the response that the Pharisees have is he crazy? Doesn't he know what kind of woman this is? How many times in our lives do we sometimes have don't you know what kind of person this is? Fill in the blanks. Come down to verse 44. And I love this. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon. Now everything he's going to say appears to be to Simon. But since he's turned toward the woman, everything he's about to say seems to be directed to Simon, but I believe it's directed to the woman. Have you ever had a day when you were discouraged? People didn't like what you did. They were on your case for doing good things. Life was not as great as you had hoped it would be. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, and she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much, but he who has been forgiven little loves little. Now, reminder, who's he talking to? He's talking to the woman. He's talking to the sinner woman. He's talking to a woman who in that day would be considered the dregs of the society. She's at the bottom rung of the totem pole. Verse 48, Jesus says to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests begin to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Now notice Jesus' actions. We can focus on what he said, and he's talking to Simon, and he's rehearsing, reminding Simon of what this woman has done. But he's also reminding the woman of what she has done. He wants her to know that he understands what she has done, and he is commending her, and he forgives her. When we're with people who are not all they are cut out to be, how do we treat them? I've had several situations. I remember one time a woman in a church. It hadn't been the tradition of the church, but this particular woman had learned how to arrange flowers. So one Sunday morning, she put a flower arrangement on the, back in the olden days, we had the Lord's table up here for the Lord's Supper, and all the trays were stacked up. Sometimes they had a tablecloth, "This do in remembrance of me." Sometimes that was on the table. Anyway, she put the flowers on the table. And the communion was behind it. It was not inhibiting anything. But she put the flowers on the table. And people, the leadership, not knowing who did it, blasted her for putting flowers on the Lord's table. She never put them up there again. See, that's the challenge to us as Christians is sometimes, well, let me put it this way. Have you ever noticed sometimes Christians don't always do it correctly? They don't always follow the rules correctly. They may do things that they didn't know weren't supposed to be done. Anybody know what that looks like? Well, that's the situation here. She broke all the societal rules. And it did not matter to Jesus, because what mattered to Jesus was her commitment to him. Sometimes we make mistakes out of our commitment to Jesus. Remember in Romans 14 and 15, Paul says some do this out of reverence for the Lord. Some keep the day out of reverence for the Lord. Others keep another day out of reverence for the Lord. Others don't even keep a day out of reverence for the Lord. In other words, there's all of these multiple ways of serving the Lord and loving him. And the only thing that matters is the relationship to the Lord. So you have this situation here with this woman. I love Jesus because he loves us in such a way that he understands us. He accepts what we do even when it's not perfect. He's acknowledging our motives. Have y'all ever had anybody do that for you? Anybody who stood up for you? We're in the auditorium, but we're not in church. It's permissible to speak in this room at this time of day. Okay, you're not ready to do that yet, so we'll hustle along. Yes? Good. Wonderful. Yeah. He said his wife stood up for him one time or several times when he made mistakes. Both to stand up for him and to stand by him. And that's what I see Jesus doing here is he's not only standing up for her, but he's standing by her to the degree that he forgives her sins. Now that shakes the religious world up. Who has the right to forgive sins? Well, God does, and Jesus just showed him He's God, but they didn't catch the point. So let's come to Luke chapter 10. This is another one of those famous stories. He's come to the house of Mary and Martha. Now, it's interesting that we always say Mary and Martha because I want to ask you a question in a minute. He comes to the house of Mary and Martha, chapter 10, verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, why don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Which is the older sister, do you think? Mary or Martha? Martha. She's the one who's got to do all the work. She's got the preparations to make. And you women in here, you know what it means to say, I've got to get the things right, finishing up. I'll get my words right. Complete preparations for dinner. I've got to get things finalized. I need some help in here. I'm doing this all by myself. As far as we know, Jesus is the only one there. I don't know if the apostles were there or not, but this is a one-man dinner coming up. Sometimes us older folks get all caught up in things that may not matter all that much. And Jesus reinforces his relationship with people who care about him. "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you're worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what's better, and it will not be taken away from her." Dinner will be delayed for important things. Jesus is understanding. Now, there's another little thing going on here, I think. I think that Jesus is a well-known presence in this house. This is not the first time he's been there. I mean, how many times have you ever had somebody who comes over to visit and one of the house members goes to him and said, "Would you make my sister do what she's supposed to do?" You have that dynamic going on here where they're so comfortable with Jesus that they can invite them into their family trials and tribulations, invite them into the troubles. But the powerful thing I think to see here is Jesus, he understands people. And he also understands what's important. Now, it's interesting to me also, he doesn't blast Martha. It would have been easy. "Martha, would you hush and go get back in the kitchen? We're doing important things out here." He doesn't do that. He's understanding of her, and she made the wrong choices. She's picking housekeeping over a spiritual conversation. But Jesus doesn't blast her. Now, he says plainly what the situation is. "Martha, Martha, get a grip." That's my interpretation. And she's having a little difficulty getting a grip about what's really important. But Jesus is in there with her. Does that say anything to us about being patient with one another and how life goes? We want somebody to do what we want them to do, and they're not doing what we want them to do, and we go grab somebody to come fix it for us. This thought just hit me. One of the things that I've thought about elders through the years is that so often we've treated them like school principals, or I guess really the vice principal, the one in charge of fixing it, the one in charge of discipline. When I was the associate dean of students at the university where I was, they called me the vice principal, mostly by freshmen who hadn't been in college long enough to know. I'm not in high school anymore, but I was the one who fixed it when somebody broke the rules or whatever they did. Sometimes we run to the elders to fix it. I don't know if our elders have to deal with that here or not, but sometimes we have done that in the past. And we place a burden on them. Fix it yourself. If it's your problem, go fix it. If it's your problem, go talk to the people about it. I'll talk about this eventually, but I'll go ahead and throw this out right now. Matthew 5 and Matthew 18 says, it does not matter who starts it, you fix it. You remember your kids coming to you fighting about something? But she started it. Well, he started it. I don't care who started it, you fix it. Well, that's what Jesus says to us as Christians. Yes?
Here's a thought, and I don't know, maybe could it be that both sisters were trying to honor the Lord in different ways? Often that's what we do. We try to make sure everything, all the chairs are lined up in a neat row, and we're doing all the right things, but it's not the most important thing.
Correct.
But they're both trying to honor him.
Excellent. What woman, having Jesus come to her house, would not want to have the best meal she can have? So we're not putting down Martha. Just at this occasion, there's a couple of things that are more important. One of them, I think, is the interrelationship between the two sisters. I think Jesus is correcting Martha just because she's the older sister trying to run over her younger sister. That's my interpretation. I don't know if that's correct. And the other one is that the spiritual supersedes the physical at times. But both of them are doing what they think is right. There's no way, I believe, that Martha was ignoring Jesus while she went around making the meal. Excellent point. Sometimes the same thing happens with us, is that we fail to recognize both of them may be important, so we're not putting down either one, and that's what Jesus would do. He would be supportive in all of those situations. One of my favorite texts is Luke chapter 8. Luke, I don't know if he ever uses this term, but he has a lot to say about what I call the people of the land. And I was introduced to this a long time ago and far away in college, and I don't even remember which professor told me this. But this is an example of the people of the land, and it says more about Jesus than it does about them. Look at this group of people. Jesus travels from town to town, village to village, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 are with him. Okay, those are the ones that are going to be the apostles. And also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Now this is the important part that often gets overlooked, I think. Mary, called Magdalene, which is from the north end of the Sea of Galilee. There's a town called Magda over in the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Now get this picture. What is there about Jesus that attracts a crowd to pay the bills? It's easy to get people to follow you until you start asking them for money, asking for their participation, asking them to support. Here Jesus has the apostles. Yeah, we got them. But these women, and Luke specifically says these women were with him. And these women are supporting him. And the one I really am intrigued with is Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Herod's not Jesus' friend. But the wife of one of his workers is supporting Jesus. These ladies are coming up with the money. Don't ask me where they're getting the money. But they're coming up with the money to supply the needs of the apostles. What is there about Jesus that attracts this crowd to help him? As I was driving over here this morning, this thought occurred to me. Luke chapter 2, verse 52. You remember what that says? Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. People liked Jesus. He is not this staid character running around with a frown on his face all the time. Yes, he says some very, very important things, and yes, there are times when he confronts the Pharisees, as we looked at last week. But most of the time, there must be something about the character of Jesus that attracts people to him. When we get to the book of Acts, and there's that crowd that gathers after the resurrection, and they're waiting to see there's 120 of them there. You look at Paul, how many hundreds had witnessed the resurrection of Jesus? He attracts people to him. Just because you're a Christian does not mean you got to be an old fuddy-duddy. Jesus went to parties. In fact, one guy said that Jesus at the wedding feast of Galilee, he was there just to spice up the party when he turns water to wine, which some people today would say grape juice, but it was wine. So the thing about Jesus is what he said is reinforced by who he was and what he did. He cared about people and they were attracted to him. We just looked at that story in Luke chapter 7 of the woman who anoints his feet. Why did she do that? Because there was something about the nature and character of him as a person that attracted her to him. And she wanted to be around him. So we wonder, as people of God, how well do we attract people? This first lesson has been on the triers and the sayers. The sayers are the people who talk a game they're not willing to play. The triers are the people who don't even know what the game is, but they're trying to play it. Those are the folks that Jesus paid a whole lot of attention to. He gives them a lot of credit for hanging in there with him. Those with a heart of humility, trust, and who are searching for the truth, Jesus will hang with all day long. But those who trust in themselves, knowing that they are right, he doesn't have much room for. Now that may strike us as a bit peculiar for me to say this, but I do want to put this. Jesus did pray in Matthew 23 when he blasts the Pharisees and the leaders and the people of the law. "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered you together under my wings, and you would have nothing to do with it." It wasn't that Jesus disliked them except for their attitudes and actions. Jesus was very concerned about them, but he didn't have a place for them because they were not sick. They were righteous, if you remember that language. And he did not come to call the righteous, but the sick, because they're the ones who know they need help. Okay, next story. It's in John chapter 4. This is my favorite all-time story in the Bible because of Jesus' interactions with the Samaritan woman. There's so much wrapped up in this. We get caught up in the where do we worship and that interaction with her about places of worship and worship in spirit and truth. But the intriguing thing about this story to me is not that, though that is absolutely critical to our understanding of our relationship with God. What attracts me to this story is the Samaritan woman and how he relates to her and how he intrudes into her life and she accepts it and rejoices in it. Let's look at John chapter 4, start in verse 1. The Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, and although Jesus was not the one who baptized, his disciples did it. Verse 4, now he had to go through Samaria. Now that's an important, to my mind, that's an important little piece of unimportant information. I have up here a pic of a, well, wrong one. Jesus is up here in Nazareth, and I'm sorry you can't read that really clearly. In Nazareth, most of the time Jesus would come over here to the Jordan River and come down the Jordan River and then come up through Jericho to Jerusalem, which is right in this area. On this time, it says he had to go through Samaria down, and he ends up down here at Sychar. Sorry about the shakiness. I think they call them essential tremors where my hand shakes. Just for the fun of it. Anybody got those? Yeah. So y'all just have to hope you find in the shaking of my hand where I'm talking about. So most of the time they'd come down the Jordan River, come up by Jericho and up to Jerusalem. Well, he's going to end up down here at Sychar, which is where Jacob had drilled a well. And the last time I heard that they had checked it, it's over 100 feet deep. So he picked a good place to find water. But why did he have to go? When you're walking everywhere, you don't go out of the way for nothing. Most of the time I'm really messing it up. Okay, I'll set it down. So we have this situation where the text says he had to go through Samaria. Now, why did he have to go through Samaria? He came to the town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. Anybody know what time 6th hour is in the Bible? What? Noon. Good. 12 o'clock. High noon. Sun's right up there. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus is breaking every rule in the book socially. He's a man. This is in a day when men were superior to women. Still struggle with getting over that misplaced idea. Living in a day because of the racial disharmony between the Jews and the Samaritans. If you remember the history of the Old Testament, the Samaritans were basically what I would call, and this is a negative term, but the half-breeds between the Jews and the Assyrians and everybody that the conquerors had brought in. Because they would come in, take everybody out, bring a new bunch in, and intermarry with the local people, and then you created a whole new race, and you wouldn't have to worry about people rising up and fighting against you like the Jews eventually would do. So the Samaritans were nobodies. It's interesting that Jesus uses the Good Samaritan in one of his more famous parables. So they were nobodies. So Jesus is sitting down at the well. He asks this woman, he doesn't demand it. She doesn't assume that she has to. He asks her for a drink. Now, when she hands him the drink, most of the times the rules were, if a Samaritan handled the dish, you cannot use it if you're a Jew without becoming unclean. So you've got all of these social interactions that are being destroyed. Jesus was wiping out all of the social conventions. Man talking to a woman. Jewish man, even more important, talking to a woman. Jewish man talking to a Samaritan woman. This blows up everything in terms of societal expectations. And he throws her off guard. It's unusual to see a man at the well at noon. They should be out working somewhere. Jesus is there at the well. People have said through the years, as we're going to see about her character, that she was there so she wouldn't have to meet the women of the town in the early morning when everybody else came to get water. I don't know if that's true or not, but she's still there at a weird time of day, and he's there at a weird time of the day. So they have this exchange going on. How is it that you're talking to me, and how is it that you're wanting a drink? Jesus does not go well in boxes. He does not do well in parameters established around him. It reminds me, the way Jesus acted reminds me of the name Yahweh, which is where they got the word Jehovah. Yahweh, basically, as far as we can understand it, because nobody has ever pronounced it in over 2,000 years, was God's name. And this is the name that we so often see translated, I am that I am. Well, it also is translated, I will be whom I will be. In other words, I am that I am and I will be who I will be means you can't evoke my name and expect me to jump to your call like I'm on a leash. I will do what I want to do. I will do what I need to do. I am God, and you can't tell me what to do because I am independent of humanity and of the universe. I will be who I will be. So God doesn't fit in our boxes. You know, people used to think, well, if you call down God's name, that means he had to do what you wanted him to do. And God's name says, nah, another thing coming. I will do what I do. I will do the right thing to do, and I will do it for your benefit. Well, that's the way Jesus operates. In fact, he later will say, they say, well, who are you? And he says, before Abraham was, I am. And the text says they picked up stones to stone him because he just gave God's name and he just claimed it. We often miss that little interaction. Verse 10, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Now that's a gentle answer. You may notice this theme that at least it's in my mind, this theme of Jesus responds to what could be very negative things with very positive responses. He doesn't get drawn into the fight and into the battle. Just because somebody disagrees with you doesn't mean you got to fight with them about it. And just because somebody disagrees with you doesn't mean you got to disagree back. Jesus doesn't even discuss the concept of whether he should or shouldn't be getting a drink of water from her. He opens a door. This is something Josh used to talk about all the time, and I imagine he still does whenever he has a chance. To open the doors. And when the door is open, walk in it. When somebody opens a spiritual door, jump through it. And it may not be as this case is, and it may not be a spiritual conversation to begin with, but Jesus turns it into one. Very gently, unobtrusively, being very nice about it. And she says, of course, you have this interaction, you've got nothing to draw water with, and what are you talking about? In verse 13, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. Verse 15, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. This is not the most fun thing in my life to do. He told her, now this is where it gets really interesting. Jesus makes a huge jump here. They're having a conversation about Jacob's well and which water is really good and Jesus can get living water. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, Jesus says, go get your husband and come back. Well, sociologically, you might could say, well, you need to go get your husband so that we can talk, or I don't know what you might put in there. But Jesus knows what this is. He knows this woman. And you wonder, why did he have to go through Samaria? He's on a mission trip, and she's going to become the missionary. And she says, I have no husband. Now stop and think about this. This is in a day when women could not independently have jobs that were useful or meaningful or right. So for her to say that she has no husband is a hard thing for her to have to say. And then he says to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. Now think through this. She is a 5-time reject. 5 times she has been kicked out of the house. 5 times she thought this one will be different. And it wasn't. 5 times she searched for happiness, or at least for support. And she hasn't gotten it. And the man she's now living with is not her husband. That means she and he have given up. It's kind of like the guy, you remember in the olden days when a guy might lose 3 wives from various childbirth, cholera, whatever. And you finally get around, I don't really want to do this. In fact, this happened in the Bible. Who was it that kept dying, and Judah was supposed to marry her? Oh, it was the brothers who were supposed to marry her to take it up, and he wouldn't do it because he didn't want to be the next death in the family. Y'all remember what I'm talking about? Okay, good. I'm not making that up. So here you have this situation. This Samaritan woman just grabs at my heart because she is a nobody of nobody of nobodies. Nobody has accepted her. Nobody has cared for her. Nobody has picked her up. Nobody has supported her. She is truly on her own, except for this shacking up arrangement with this 6th guy. And I'm sure she's doing that purely out of self-preservation. And Jesus knows it. And he opens the door into her heart by saying, I know what's going on here. Sometimes when people are hurting, we don't need to try to fix the problem. We just need to walk into their lives and be understanding. I don't know how many times Ann has said to me, I don't need you to fix it. I can fix it. I just need your support. Which makes me feel like a heel. Because all I know is how to fix it. I don't know how to give support sometimes. 50 years people ask me questions because I was the preacher. I thought I was supposed to know all the answers. Well, I didn't. And I keep trying to give them occasionally. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus was supportive of her. And then she does what people accuse her of, but I don't think she does what they accuse her of. Jesus said, "You 5 husbands, what you said is quite true." We're in verse 19. Sir, I can see that you're a prophet. For a long time, I thought she was trying to change the subject. I'm not so sure anymore. I think if this guy, who's a total stranger to me, can know how many husbands I've had and know the one I have now, this guy must know that I don't have, and he's a prophet to figure that out. So I'm not so sure she's trying to change the subject as she is, whoa, I might want to talk to this guy. He may have some information that I don't understand yet. And so she raises the centuries-old concept of, you can't really see it there, but right over here is Mount Gerizim, just to the west of Sychar, Shechem. And that was the mountain that the Samaritans held in great regard. And that's what she's talking about. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. See, one of the things that happened in the Old Testament was the northern kingdom had to have an alternative place to worship from Jerusalem so everybody wouldn't head back down to Jerusalem. Well, tradition has continued for centuries, and now the Samaritans are worshiping on Mount Gerizim rather than the mount in Jerusalem where the temple was. And so she's raising that current ongoing religious debate to Jesus. And Jesus responds to her, and we have this conversation about worship in spirit and truth and so on. And then the woman said, I know that Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything. Jesus declared, I who speak to you am he. I think that the reason he had to go to Samaria was to meet the Samaritan woman. Verse 27, just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. See there? That's not what people do. But no one asked, and this is another important thing, what do you want or why are you talking with her? They understood intuitively that something going on here is out of the ordinary. And that's critically important to notice. Then leaving her water jar, and here comes the rest of the story. The woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I did." And in the Revised Standard Version, there's a dash there. He told me everything I did, and if you fill in my blank, and he still accepted me. There is a powerful note of acceptance here on the part of the Samaritan woman in understanding what Jesus had done. She goes and tells everybody in town, and they come out to see him. Then in verse 39, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days, and because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we've heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." That's why he had to go to Samaria. He had to do a mission trip down there to meet one of the greatest missionaries ever, which was the Samaritan woman, because of the way he treated her. And I think that's the important concept in this story. We're looking not just at what Jesus said, but what he did. And in this story, we're not looking at what he said, which is what we most often do in this story, in terms of true worship and so on. We're looking at how he treated this outcast woman, this nobody woman, this, quote, no good, unquote, woman, how he treated her, no matter who she was or where she came from. Now, I doubt in many of our churches we've had people married 5 times. Even if they have been, Jesus would say, that's okay. It's not okay you did it, but it's okay. I love you. I care about you. I want you to come along with me. So that's what we see Jesus doing. Jesus was the kind of person who knows us most powerfully and most intimately. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And he still accepts us. And that's what's astonishing. I look back over my life, and you look and say, well, you've been a preacher all your life. Well, I also was a sinner all my life. I've shared my story with all the men, or a lot of the men. I was a sinner all my life, and to imagine that God's letting me teach and preach, quote, one more time, is beyond my belief. And that's why when the elders asked me to fill in, there was no way I was going to say no. Because if God's going to let me do it again, I'm going to do it again. That's the kind of God he is. He can get past our nuttiness and our craziness and our sinfulness. But he still knows us, and he knows what we can accomplish. That sounds a whole lot like a sermon, so I'd better quit. Next week, we'll look at some more of how Jesus interacted with people and see what he did. And I love doing this because it's so human to see Jesus interacting with us in so many different kinds of ways. And he still loves us. So hang on for worship, and looking forward to Israel talking to us this morning.